Welcome, everyone. My name is Ed Iacobucci. I'm the dean here at the faculty. I want to thank you for coming to this year's Goodman Lecture. Before introducing our lecturer this year, Mayor Brian Bowman of Winnipeg, let me give a little bit of context for this year's talk and for the Goodman Lecture generally. The Goodman Lecture was established in memory of the late David B. Goodman, QC, by members of his family, friends, and professional associates with the intention of bringing to the law school on an annual basis a distinguished member of the practicing bar to interact with the student body and faculty. It was the intention of the founders of the fellowship that the Goodman Fellow would, on the one hand, bring to the faculty the benefit of insights and ideas gained from experience in the practical application of law, and on the other hand, have the opportunity, him or herself, to be refreshed by a short return to the academic legal community. This year's lecture is also important in a broader context. It's entitled Appropriate Responses to the Final Report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It is obviously a timely subject, not just at our faculty, but across the university and indeed across the country. We, as a faculty and as a university community, are trying to figure out how do we chart a course of action in response to the TRC's report and historical injustice to Canada's Indigenous peoples. Along those lines, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and express a debt of gratitude on the part of the faculty to two members of our audience, Norman and Gay Loveland, who are in the back. I want to thank them for being here, and I want to thank them for recently committing to a very generous pledge to the Faculty of Law to support our efforts in enhancing Indigenous people's presence here at the faculty and their impact here at the faculty and on our law school community, but also in the broader legal profession and in Canada. So thank you for your gift and thank you for being here. It's now my privilege to introduce Mayor Brian Bowman as the 2016-17 Goodman Lecturer. Mayor Bowman is an important figure in this country. He's the first Indigenous mayor of a major Canadian city. He is somebody who has has Métis roots. His Métis identity has influenced his life in both ways, small and large. And I just confirm this. He recalls not being able to eat his Sunday supper until he danced the Red River Jig for his grandfather, as an example. There are other aspects that maybe weren't as fond memories, including getting teased for bringing Bannock to lunch at school, and it may be leading into an altercation that the mayor described as not necessarily going that well for him at the end. But it's clearly a big part of his life. But at the same time, as he says, and I'll quote him, I've always been comfortable telling people that I'm Métis, but at the same time, I'm a Winnipegger, first and foremost, and I want everybody to be proud of their heritage wherever they come from. Mayor Bowman comes from a working class background and put himself through our law school with student loans, actually, something that happened indeed even in the 90s. He was active when he was here, working with the dean at the time, to both build the financial aid conceptual framework that we have in place, really in some ways to this day, but also to raise funds for it. So he was very active at an early stage. He was president of the Student Law Society when he was here. An election he recalls as being nearly as tough as the mayoral race in Winnipeg, which I find hard to believe given how easygoing student politics is. After graduation, the Bowman worked at two Winnipeg law firms, Aikens, Macaulay, and Thorvaldson, and Pitt Blato Law. And he built a practice centering on technology and privacy. And so he graduated in 1999, and he built a practice centered on technology and privacy. There were doubters then that this could be an area that could sustain a practice. There are not doubters today on that front. And he deserves, I think, credit for his foresight in seeing what was coming in these areas. But as he has also put it, as I understand it, he also said that had I practiced corporate law, I would have lost my mind. At which point, I don't want to take credit for the mayor's career path, but I do know that he was actually in one of the very first advanced corporate law securities classes that I taught here at this faculty. So I'd like to think that I might have played a small role in his success. In actuality, he said he conceived his practice by thinking about where the economy and the law would be a decade hence, not where it was at the time, which is something that he did to great effect in his campaign for mayor in Winnipeg, imagining what Winnipeg would look like with 1 million people. But let's be clear, this is not man simply of great accomplishment. I'm told also that the mayor likes to quote Adam Sandler movies, the dramas in particular, the serious dramas, and is a fan of heavy metal as well, as a way of kind of relieving the pressure of his office. He's also had to rise above a reputation for niceness. And this is another quote: "Just because I'm generally a happy guy doesn't mean I don't do the heavy lifting. On a day-to-day basis, I get my elbows up in practice, and when I'm negotiating around a board table, I go toe-to-toe with opposing counsel." Mayor Bowman has also observed that building a national practice out of Winnipeg is not always a straight line path, and has had to deal with some very difficult negotiations with some formidable litigators across the country. But he also says that hearing that you're too nice his entire life, he's found that it's actually been a source of strength because he's quite often been underestimated as a consequence. Certainly, his run for mayor found him starting out as an underdog, and rivals who may have underestimated him made a mistake. By the end of his 2014 campaign, the Winnipeggers chose Mayor Bowman by a wide margin. He took the reins of Winnipeg City Hall in November 2014. It's a city that, like many cities, faces challenges. Some of its challenges are particularly acute, if not unique, to Winnipeg. Certainly not every mayor of a city is confronted with headlines on the front page of Maclean's saying that Winnipeg is Canada's most racist city. This is something that Mayor Bowman has taken as part of his ambition, something to confront, something to work on. There are many things that he's done in his role, but this has certainly been a priority for him. So we are privileged and honored to have him here today, and particularly speaking on the subject of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as somebody who, as not only in his day-to-day life, confronting these very important issues, but of course throughout his life it's been a part of his identity for a very long time. So thank you for being here. It's a privilege and an honor, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean, and it's a true honor to be back at my alma mater, and I also see some dear friends. Andrea and I graduated together. Tim Hutzel in the back, and I have spent a lot of time doing work with Phi Delta Phi and other things in relation to our legal backgrounds and political backgrounds as well. So it's good to see you here as well, Tim. I came here, first day of law school at University of Toronto was overwhelming. It was scary, and I kept asking myself, do I belong here? It's kind of like the first day when I became mayor. I had the same feelings. What am I doing here? How did I get here? And thankfully for me and my family now, I did have the opportunity to go to University of Toronto, and I had never really left Winnipeg. And I did my undergrad at the University of Manitoba in political studies and history. Had a wonderful time there. And this was moving to the big city for 3 years, and it was an incredibly positive experience. Toronto is a wonderful city, and those that are from Toronto, and obviously if you're living here now, you should be very proud of what Toronto has become. And not unlike other cities, faces some of the similar issues of transportation, of disjointed revenue streams, you name it. The cities are very much on the front line of building a new and more progressive Canada. And my time at the U of T was incredibly positive. The student engagement, the faculty engagement was strong then, as it's continued. And I feel very, very blessed to have been taught by, I think, some of the finest professors in the world. University of Toronto, of course, is a very active environment for student engagement, especially the student groups. I remember being involved with the International Law Students Association, the Aboriginal Law Students Association, SLS, of course. It was a tough election. I was up against a really good friend of mine, And he was much cooler than I am, and he was really good. And we lived in the Law House together with friends on Charles Street West, and it was absolutely a tough campaign. What I learned at the University of Toronto, I would have to say, was really how to teach myself to learn. I came in here and was blown away at the level of expectations and the brain power of my peers. And so I had to up my game, just like I did when I got into practice, and just like I did when I was running for mayor and now serving as mayor, constantly trying to surround yourself with people that are much smarter than yourself. For me, that's not very difficult to do. My chief of staff, Jason, who's here with me, was the smartest guy in high school. We met in grade 9. I almost dared him to run my campaign if I ran. He took it, and then when we won, I asked him to quit his job. He had about a day to decide and speak with his wife to make sure she was okay with it, and the transition period was pretty quick. But my time at University of Toronto was great. Time in Toronto was wonderful, and I certainly felt when I left here that I had a strong footing to make a difference in the world, first and foremost. And so I thought about, where do I want to start my practice? Where did I want to do my articles? It really wasn't a tough decision. For me, returning back to Winnipeg was a no-brainer. It's a city, tremendous opportunity, right in the geographic center of our great country. And I was able to build a national practice in an emerging area of law, I think in part because of where I was situated. We were kind of off the radar in some ways in Canada. And also the time zone helped, and a few other things. But I definitely was mentored by some great lawyers at 2 of Winnipeg's leading law firms. And I practiced for 14 years, as was mentioned in the opening remarks, in the areas of privacy, access to information, and social media law. Social media law, very multidisciplinary in the final few years of my practice, cyber defamation, among many other areas. Perhaps the most emotionally draining part of the practice, privacy and access to information, a little more sterile and a little bit easier emotionally to park it when you leave the office. But tremendously important areas of law that really transcend so many other areas of law on the front lines of some of the big legal questions that we have to face as a country in this modern era. So I was active in student government here, and that was my first real taste of politics, and learned some do's and don'ts when I was president of the Students' Law Society. But I got really active in student government for a reason. I just, like I'm sure many of you, just wanted to try to do my best to help make things better in my law school. And then when I returned back to Winnipeg, I spent much of my time volunteering for nonprofit groups. I was politically active for a few years, got a little bit turned off of the hyper-partisanness that I saw, and so I really focused my energies on nonprofits. The Winnipeg Art Gallery, Canada's oldest civic art gallery. It houses the world's largest modernist Inuit art collection. Became chair of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, volunteered for an Indigenous group in our inner city called Ganeganechuck, and it's an organization that predominantly provides support services to our First Nations community. And those experiences really helped shape and motivate my drive to put my name on the ballot, something that, quite honestly, I thought my wife would do first. She's much brighter, much better speaker, and definitely better looking. And so I thought, well, you know what? I didn't like what I was seeing at City Hall. We had a very tumultuous time at our City Hall in the previous administration. There's still an ongoing RCMP investigation as a result of some a development for a new police headquarters, and the city needed a little bit more steady hand at City Hall, a little more positivity, and a lot more collaboration. And so I thought, well, what the heck? What's the worst thing that could happen if I put my name on the ballot? I could win. And so I put my name on the ballot, and I ran under the tagline, "A New Generation of Leadership." And I was inspired to run for municipal politics because I truly believe Canada is, in many ways, being led, and some of the most progressive modern thinking is happening at the municipal level. It's not always what attracts the headlines, certainly not always for the right reasons in Winnipeg and Toronto, but certainly when you take a look at the opportunities to make a difference, it's the level of government that's closest to the people. It's in many ways the most nimble level of government where, at least in our case, you don't have party banners at City Hall. It forces collaboration. My executive policy committee, my cabinet, is comprised of members of the NDP, the Liberals, and the PCs, and a few people I haven't got a clue what their partisanship is. I just know they're good people, they're smart, they're there for the right reasons, and when we disagree, we're able to work it out, usually privately, and come out together with a unified compromise that makes sense for the city. And I was watching what was happening out west. I saw Mayor Nenshie's successful run, watched him in office, have been feeling very blessed to get to know him on a personal level, and also Gregor Robertson out in Vancouver, Don Iveson in Edmonton, John Tory here. I mean, there are so many really strong leaders across Canada that are making a difference. Mayor Crombie as well now I'm getting to know from Mississauga. But I was looking out west, and what I saw was a wave of what I call new generation leadership coming from the west, moving east. I don't know if that's accurate. Being in Eastern Canada, you may say, well, it started in the east and worked its way west, or it started right here in the center of the universe. But what I saw was this at a national level, all across our country. I saw this engagement. And when I say new generation leadership, I'm talking about more technology savvy, more long-term, less partisan, and just progressive leadership. And so I was inspired to run, and the campaign was a lot of fun. When I put my name on the ballot, I was at 3% in the polls. The leader at the time was Judy Wassila-Chalice. She's a former NDP member of Parliament. She served with honor, both also in the provincial legislature in Manitoba. A formidable opponent. There were 7 of us in total, including Robert Falcon-Ouellette, who's now serving as a member of Parliament for a riding association in Winnipeg. Also formidable opponent. I had a great time getting to know them. It was a very positive experience. And my campaign was all built on positivity. It was, we're not going to build a better Winnipeg. We're not going to build a better country by tearing each other down. And I certainly didn't have during the campaign, nor do I have now, a monopoly on good ideas. We need to get the best and brightest ideas from wherever we can find them and use them to the betterment of the communities that we serve. And so that was the gamble for me, was whether or not it was going to be more of the same, if voters would embrace the attack-style politics that were ultimately used against me, or if they would embrace a little more positivity, a little more belief in our people and our city, and a very disciplined refrain from personal attacks. And so that was one of the ground rule number 1 for us, was we're going to talk about what we can do. We're going to pay compliments when other candidates come out with good ideas, and we're going to present something different. And in the Q&A, if we want to talk about other campaigns we've seen recently, more than happy to talk about that as well. But I'll first go through just my formal remarks. The campaign was new for me. I'd never run for politics before. I'd never put my name on a ballot for elected office outside of this building and outside of the Students' Law Society. And so I didn't really know what to expect. We have 2 young boys. They're 8 and they're 6 now, and they got right into it, especially our eldest son, Hayden, who is now 8. So he was 6 years old at the time. Our youngest, Austin, was 4. And Tracy and I had really been involved in politics for years, so we thought we had a sense of it. But you never really know until you put your name on the ballot. And so when we did, you had to go down to City Hall and you have to register. And I remember that day vividly. And I tell this story because of the challenge I make to Canada, is sometimes do things that might be a little bit scary. And this was definitely, for me on a personal level, a scary thing to do. We got our papers. Didn't know which office to go to, so we had to send advance team the day before so that if the media were there, they didn't see me not, getting lost at City Hall. And so we went down to City Hall. We had the advance team all ready to go. We had the papers signed. I had my best suit on. Our sons had their little sports coats. They wanted to look just like their dad. And our youngest son, Austin, who was in diapers and wearing pull-ups at the time, insisted on wearing underwear. He said, I'm going to be like Dad. I'm going to be a big boy. And I was petrified that, I was petrified he's not wearing diapers. And so I sat him down. I said, there could be TV cameras. It's going to be real. There's going to be bright lights. It's going to be really different, Austin, So he insisted. So he wanted to wear the little City of Winnipeg pin and everything. So we went down, we hop out of our van, and there was a wall of media there that I had never been exposed to in my life. There's probably about 10 or 15 cameras, a lot of TV cameras and all that. And I took Tracy's hand, and she took Hayden's hand, and I took Austin's hand, and we walked up the steps of City Hall as a family. And she said, I said, I'm. How are you doing? She said, good. I just hope our boy doesn't have an accident. And I said, I know. I'm looking at him. He's doing well. She said, I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about you. And so I say that because, certainly for the students, when you get out and practice, it is scary. It is scary articling. It is scary that, first time you go into a courtroom, first time you go into a big boardroom, first time you do something in the community like running for office, it might be a little bit scary. And those are exactly the kinds of things that you should be doing. That's the only way to push the envelope. It's the only way to change the world. And that was the feeling that I had each and every day at the U of T Faculty of Law. That intimidation factor was always there. It never went away. The exhaustion was there as well, just like the role I'm in and many of you are in leadership roles. But it's certainly, that story is one that I tell to the students that I visit in all of our schools, to challenge them to get outside your comfort zone and do something that you're passionate about. And in my case, if I had lost the election, I had a job, it wasn't the end of the world, and so I approached the campaign as if I could win or lose, but only on the right terms. You got to look yourself in the mirror, you got to be able to look your family and your children in the eyes, and if you can do that with whatever your own pursuits are, I think that it'll serve you very, very well. Elected office has been also a tremendous learning experience. It's been 2 years now that I've been in office. In my more formal remarks, I'm going to talk more about, of course, reconciliation. But within the first few months of office, we were dealing with this RCMP investigation with regards to the police headquarters that predates my term in office, and that's very important if anybody's taking notes. But we were also dealing with the boil water advisory. I remember getting a call from Jason saying we may have problems with the water, and I said, excuse me, and we had to issue a boil water advisory. The water ultimately was safe, but there were some issues with the testing. Also within months, I think within 2 months of taking office, we had this Maclean's article. And within the early days, there was plenty of opportunities for a new mayor to stumble. And I'm going to talk about reconciliation now, because I think that's obviously what I think you came here to hear me speak about. And reconciliation is something that you do hear a lot about. I know it's been something on the radar, and the University of Toronto Faculty of Law has been, I think, in the reconciliation business since I was here, and probably long before that. It may not have been branded that way, it may not have been shaped that way, and I know faculty as well as the City of Winnipeg and other organizations are constantly looking for ways in which to do a better job. And that's something that I applaud this faculty for its leadership to date and its ongoing efforts, which I'm certainly following very carefully from Winnipeg. But let's talk about reconciliation. One thing is for certain. As BC Grand Chief Stuart Phillip has said, reconciliation is not for wimps. It's very difficult, it's hard, but if people have the courage, the results can be amazing. If you look at Deloitte's website has under their insights section, they have an article about courage in business. And I mention this because this study from Deloitte suggests that, and I quote, courageous businesses outperform their peers. Now, the study's entitled "The Future Belongs to the Bold," and it says that courageous businesses experience greater revenue growth, and create more jobs, plain and simple. And it defines courageousness and courageous business as the ones that do the right thing, the ones that do the hard things for the greater good, despite being filled with fear, doubt, or uncertainty. Now, I know from personal experience that there's a lot of courage in our communities, in this community, and in our country. And I know from personal experience that there's a lot of courage in our legal community, in Toronto and across our country, and I know in this room as well. In Winnipeg's case, that's why I declared 2016 as our year of reconciliation. And it's in many ways marked a real beginning for the city of Winnipeg because of the courage of the people of our community, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, newcomers and long-time residents alike. It's really the courage of Canadians that gives me tremendous hope. Now, one thing that I typically do, I would normally start this address by acknowledging we're on Treaty 1 land and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation, and I'm not going to do the acknowledgement because I presume that's done often here, and I also don't want to get some of the pronunciations wrong. But the reason we do the acknowledgement, we certainly are doing it more often now in Winnipeg, recognizing that we're on treaty land, is something that shouldn't be undervalued or underappreciated. In Winnipeg and in Manitoba, you hear our Lieutenant Governor, we hear the Prime Minister make the acknowledgement, depending on where he is across our country, our Premier, elected officials, and others. And I ask the question, why is this important? Why does it really matter? Well, for a long time, Canada's treaties were with First Nations, they weren't really talked about. They weren't really, I would argue, top of mind for most people, certainly most public officials. And if people were aware of them, they treated them like historical documents looking back. Not much interest today. For First Nations people, though, the treaties have always meant so much more. They were meant to be, and more importantly, they were meant to be, felt to be, the opening chapter of an ongoing story. A story of partnership between First Nations and newcomers. And that's why treaties are what they essentially are, in spirit and in law. They mattered as much to non-Indigenous peoples as Indigenous peoples. We are, in fact, all treaty people. And that's something that we say in Winnipeg and Manitoba quite often, that we are all treaty people. They are not solely for the benefit of one group. They are for the benefit of all Canadians. Canada, when the treaties were signed, were seeking access to land and resources. They were a means to achieve Canada's national dream of the Great Railway from coast to coast. First Nations saw the treaties, however, as a bridge to the future and as a way to provide for future generations moving forward. Both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people saw the treaties as a foundation for mutual peace and security. And without the treaties, I would argue that there likely would be no country from sea to sea to sea. Just as without Louis Riel and the contribution of the Métis, there'd be no Manitoba as we know it today. Now, the treaties were the opening story for Winnipeg, for Manitoba, and for Canada, a story of peace and partnership. And that story of partnership that the treaties opened was interrupted, and that mutual trust was lost. And so when we acknowledge that we're on treaty land, it's a small gesture towards reconciliation, a small gesture that we want to rebuild that partnership, then regain some of the trust that was lost. A small gesture, an indication that we want to resume the story of peace and partnerships that the treaties opened. So why was the story interrupted? The story of peace and partnership that it was meant to be. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but as we all know now, racism was fundamental to the interruption and the resulting disruption and discord. And I don't think there's any other way you can say it. Pure and simple, black and white racism. Now, there were many dark chapters which intervened when the story, which was meant to be told of Winnipeg, of Manitoba, of Canada, when it was interrupted. Of course, the most shocking chapter was that of residential schools in our country. And we're very fortunate that former Justice Maurice Sinclair, serves on my Mayor's Indigenous Advisory Circle, and he brings to the table just immense wisdom and knowledge of an elder in the Indigenous traditions. He also brings, though, the wisdom of an elder in the arts of non-Indigenous jurisprudence and government. He is a very real bridge builder between cultures, and he shows by example, I think, what is possible. When the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission were released, then Justice Maurice Sinclair spoke, and his words were very powerful. It was one of those moments where I remember where I was. I was at the University of Winnipeg, assembled with many of our community's First Nations, Treaty 1 chiefs, and community leaders, academics, business leaders. And he said then, and I quote, "We heard the effects of over 100 years of mistreatment, over 150,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children placed in these schools. Removed from their families and home communities, 7 generations of Aboriginal children were denied their identity. We heard how separated from their language, culture, spiritual traditions, and collective history, how children became unable, this part always gets me, especially as a dad, became unable to answer questions as simple as, where do I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? Who am I?" Now, for the parents here, ask yourself, what if your children couldn't answer that? How would that make you feel as a parent? Now, they were stripped of their self-respect and their identity. And it really is impossible to imagine a story of peace and partnership gone further astray than that. It is diametrically opposed to the image that we hold so near and dear of our country. A land of tolerance, a land of diversity and civility. Yet as history shows us, as the TRC documents demonstrate, this is exactly what's happened. It was, as Senator Maurice Sinclair said, quote, "one of the darkest, most troubling chapters in our collective history." So it'd be easy to despair knowing this dark chapter and knowing the effect that it's had and the effect that it really continues to have through intergenerational survivors of the residential schools. But as Senator Sinclair has said something that I think we should all take heart in. He said, "We must endeavor to become a society that champions human rights, truth, and tolerance, not by avoiding the dark history, but rather by confronting it." And this is what Winnipeggers from many walks of life have tried to do. We have tried to reflect our highest ideals, not by avoiding a dark history, but by confronting it head on. So, of course, I speak, and you may know about the Maclean's article that has been referenced today. And the headline read, "Welcome to Winnipeg, where Canada's racism problem is at its worst." It's not a headline you want to see as a new mayor, and not one that any person who takes pride in their community wants to see. And I remember that day incredibly vividly. I saw the headline on Twitter. I saw the screenshot of the front page the night before at about 11 o'clock. And I thought, okay, well, this isn't going to be good. The next morning, I got to City Hall in my office, and staff fortunately had a copy in hard copy. And Nancy McDonald was the author. Nancy is originally from Winnipeg. And she was tough. She was unsparing. Most of all because what she showed us in the actual article is we don't just have a dark history. For far too many, the present is dark as well. not just in Winnipeg, but in communities across our country. It was a really painful moment for Winnipeg, and it was a painful moment for me. As a new mayor who loves his city, who believes in his city, and it was impossible not to be emotionally moved in reading that article and the stories that were chronicled throughout. Tina Fontaine, so many other tragedies that our community has had to confront. And on that day, and what I really want to talk about is on that day we had a choice to make. On that day as a community, we had to choose between dismissing that characterization or by acknowledging that, yeah, racism exists in our community. I had some people telling me to essentially be a politician, do what probably politically short-term may have made sense. I don't believe that's the case, but the advice was attack the messenger. Go after Maclean's. Go after Nancy McDonald. A good person, I might add. I had people advising me, find a distraction, make an announcement today, do something else, change the channel. That's one standard political tactic that you can use. I also had people just saying, well, you know what, just ignore it. Stay in your office. Talking about it is only going to perpetuate racial divides. It's going to give haters and racists a bigger platform. I also had people saying, be careful, you don't want to own this. Racism is a big, difficult topic. You don't want to be the poster child for trying to tackle this problem. And I'm not. So many people are doing such good work across our country. So those were some of the advice that I was receiving, but I got a lot of advice. On that day, in the end, what I felt we needed to do is we needed to be courageous and we had to be bold. And I was pleased that our community chose to come together to recognize that racism exists and we needed to do a much better job of working to address it. So what I did that day, for those of you who didn't see some of the coverage, is we had about 45 minutes between the time we clicked the switch and I had about 10 staff working the phone lines to engage with many of the community leaders that I had already engaged with in the early weeks as mayor, and I knew some of them from community work. So this was the head of the AMC, head of the Manitoba Métis Federation, many of the treaty chiefs, many of the community leaders, many of the presidents of universities and colleges, the head of our Chamber of Commerce. We assembled quite a diverse group of people that we had already started talking about reconciliation and other things. And so we called them down to my office. They didn't know what I was going to say, but the trust was there that they said, no problem, coming down. And so some were given 15 minutes notice and they were about 10 minutes away and they still made it. And we had an elder come in, we did a smudge, we did a prayer. I think Wab Canoe was there, who's now a member of our Legislative Assembly, a friend of mine. He came in and did a drum, an honor song. It was quite a moving moment. And what I said privately to them is that we need to step up and we need to speak from the heart, and we don't need to spin anything. Let's address the media. I didn't think there'd be so much media, to be honest. We addressed the media and we came out together out of my office, and when we could have finger pointed, blamed, or found excuses, we came together and we didn't find distractions. We came together to face some painful truths. We came together to embrace people and diversity and to find ways to better deliver dignity and opportunity for everyone in our community. And I know everyone, certainly in this room here today, we all have this in common. We all aspire to be problem solvers. If there's one thing this faculty does its best to teach its students is to be problem solvers, regardless of what the challenge may be. So when I took on what I thought was crazy task or idea of running for mayor, I said that I wanted to accomplish 4 things. I wanted to have greater openness and transparency at our city hall. I wanted to develop a growing, thriving, more modern city, and a city where people could and would take increasing pride in, and a city that would become much more fiscally sustainable. Now, I still want those things, but here's the thing: I want them for everybody in our community, for every citizen from every background. And if some people were excluded from that Winnipeg, the Winnipeg that I love and want and dream about, well, that's no good. That's not good for anybody. So there was really no question in my mind that we had to react the way that we did. We had to confront the problem head on with no excuses. And what lifted me up that day, the day that the article hit newsstands and the media from across Canada paid attention, was the way that Winnipeggers reacted. And that was much more important than any press conference. There was just a tremendously great, positive wave of support for facing the problem head on. Yes, we had some haters and we had some media commentators, one of which said that I'd thrown Winnipeg under the bus, that I should have defended our honor and essentially attacked Maclean's, which is ridiculous. When you read the story, if you haven't read it, and I would encourage you to read it, because it's a story that is told about Winnipeg, but it's a story that's told about Canada. Now, the article in Maclean's gave us focus and definition to some big problems that we have as a country. Problems which are affecting Canadians from coast to coast to coast, but which we definitely have to address, and we have to address them in a determined and a very sustained way. What the initial article, I don't think, fully accounted for was the depth of caring in our community, the sense of community that we have, and the determination that people have to work hard at every level to make a difference. Friend to friend, family to family, in our neighborhoods, in our businesses, our community organizations, yes, in government, and in diversity. The article appeared, people came forward wanting to understand, wanting to help. And those offers of help came from Toronto, they came from Montreal, they came from Vancouver, Calgary, from across the country. Offers of help from municipal leaders, not-for-profit groups, academia, business groups, all reached out and said, we're in, how can we help? So what I said that day is we have a responsibility to turn a ship around, really to change the way that we all relate, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians alike. And really, what I called for was all hands on deck. Canadians across the country, I hope, that have seen and have been paying attention, have seen Winnipeggers have responded. And I'm encouraged by it too. Nancy MacDonald, the author, has said that she senses a change at the grassroots level, and that Winnipeggers seem very different to her now, a year later. I was hugely encouraged too by the response to a national summit that we held in partnership with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We had a national summit on racial inclusion, and that was just over a year ago. At that time, I challenged Nancy when that first Maclean's article came out. I said, you come back to Winnipeg a year later, and I want you to report on what we've actually done. Because yes, we had a press conference today. That's a one-day story. We're gonna work, and I want you to come back, and I want you to report on what we're doing. And she wrote another article a year later that focused on really what was happening in the community. We're doing a lot of things at City Hall, but really where it matters is on the ground. And she wrote another article that said Winnipeg is quickly emerging as the leader in reconciliation. There are good things happening at academic institutions and high schools, and there are lessons to be learned for Canadians about some of those things that are happening in Winnipeg, just like we have lessons that we can learn from this community and communities across Canada. The National Summit was really positive. We had a tremendously positive response to that, as well as declaring this year as the year of reconciliation for our community. But this is really just the beginning. Pain that goes back for generations won't be healed in a year. Prejudices that go back for generations will not be washed away in a year. We're striving for very profound changes in cultures, in attitudes, and actions, and that's going to take a lot of time. What's important is that having a moment of awareness, like we did with that Maclean's article, we follow up. It's important to cultivate that awareness, to disseminate knowledge, to advocate for greater understanding and positive change. So the question I raise is, what does reconciliation mean for us? I think at its most basic level, of course, is really, it's a question of simple human dignity. Young people, working people, elderly people, from every background have the right to be treated with kindness, decency, and respect. And reconciliation also means recovering that story, the Canadian story of peace, of partnership that the treaties began to tell. And that story that we lost track of somehow. Last December, Chief Sean Atleo gave a great speech at Vancouver Island University, and it was entitled, Daring Greatly Together, Reimagining Canada. The Chief is a former Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. I trust some of you probably know him. Subsequently, he's been Chancellor of Vancouver Island University, and he's put a lot of energy and thought into entrepreneurship and partnerships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And he says that through the story of racism, residential schools, and the denigration of Indigenous cultures, Canada has, and I quote, disowned its own story. He says that the story of peace and partnership has been lost. Indigenous people have ceased to be treated as the kind of partners that the treaties envisioned. Instead of being decision makers, they have had decisions made for them and to them. The Chief says that this is an economic tragedy as well as a social one. And I want to spend a couple seconds talking about that because it deprives non-Indigenous peoples of the skills and the talents and the energy of their Indigenous neighbors. And it cuts off Indigenous people from what he calls the tremendous power and the incredible innovative opportunities of the private sector in some cases. Chief Atleo says that it's time to dare together to reimagine Canada as the partnership it was meant to be, and that it can be, and that it will be. In Canada, we really can't afford to have a tale of two solitudes in which businesses, governments, organizations are deprived of youth, of talent and potential, and in which our Indigenous communities are deprived of economic opportunity. Reconciliation means doing the right thing for human dignity. That's really, I think, the most important thing. Reconciliation also means doing very good things for our community's health and our prosperity. Good people who have the chance to let their talents shine, make your businesses, your faculties, and your not-for-profits and your government shine as well. Now, I know that for so many of you, what I'm saying is me preaching to the choir, certainly in this faculty, but it's a very important song that we sing together. Winnipeg's Indigenous heritage is a source of tremendous strength and opportunity for us. Right now, our Indigenous community comprises approximately 11% of Winnipeg. The largest group is Métis, followed very closely by First Nations, and to a very small extent, our Inuit and our Dene, many of whom are transient, will travel to Winnipeg as they do Toronto for medical treatments. But it is and needs to be a source of strength and pride. We are on track to reach 1 million people in Winnipeg. We're 718,000 people right now. We're on track to reach about 1 million people in about 15 to 20 years. And when that happens, our Indigenous community will comprise 25% of Winnipeg. The face of Winnipeg is changing very fast. And it is something that all Winnipeggers should be proud of and should be seeing as a competitive advantage. Now, Winnipeg is a natural home for the Aboriginal People's Television, for many other groups. We've a great past host of the North American Indigenous Games, a world center for Inuit art with the Inuit Art Center, which will rise next to Canada's oldest civic art gallery, the Winnipeg Art Gallery. It's a focal point for so many people. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights, which is right at the heart of our city, I think, obviously the geographic center of our great nation. And it's a focal point for Indigenous art and culture across Canada. Our Indigenous heritage, it really, it enables us to do some things, some unique things that can't be done anywhere else in the world. Some of you may have heard about a company in Winnipeg called Manitoba Mucklucks. If you haven't, you should go buy their mucklucks. They're really good. And young entrepreneur, Sean McCormick, he serves on my Indigenous Advisory Circle. He'll appreciate the product plug. Sean is someone who is now selling, he's been winning fans from Kate Moss to Prince Harry, and he's selling his mucklucks around the world. It's an international success. The Globe and Mail has called Manitoba Mucklucks a brilliant model for Aboriginal businesses and the fastest growing footwear brand in Canada. And Sean says it's vital to present an alternative, hopeful reality and say to Native people and to the world, this is what we can do. I want our success to have a domino effect. He is one of hundreds and hundreds of successful entrepreneurs and companies in Winnipeg that I am incredibly proud of and supportive of because they support our Indigenous traditions, our communities, and our artisans. And when I say our, I don't mean because my background is Métis. I mean as a Winnipegger, this is our community that we should be very proud of. We are doing our best to show that Indigenous heritage and culture to the world and be proud of it. And that's something that I think Canadians should be very proud of as well. Affirming Winnipeg's Indigenous heritage, it really, it opens up new horizons in terms of talent for those organizations as well. It encourages us to recognize the unique strengths that we have as a city in terms of products, in terms of services and opportunities that only we can offer, and that is definitely something worth celebrating. We're trying to take things that some people sadly see not as competitive advantages and really embrace them. Winter is one of them. You may have heard it gets cold in Winnipeg in the winter. It does. It's freezing. That's why you should come out to Winnipeg in February for our Festival de Voyageurs. If you want a 5-star dining experience on the river, you can do that in Winnipeg in February. And it's our pop-up raw almond restaurant. There are things you can do in Winnipeg you can't do anywhere else because it's cold, because we have a large Indigenous community. And that's something that we are increasingly celebrating. And it's why National Geographic rated Winnipeg one of the top 20 must-visit destinations in the world this year to visit in the world. Top 20, only Canadian destination. And it's something that we're really proud of. And a big part of it was because it's cold in Winnipeg. Who would have thought, eh? Now, I think we're all benefiting from supporting and promoting our Indigenous neighbors. Growth and prosperity, it's not a zero-sum game. So often the successes of one of us fosters greater success for the others. And this really goes back to what Chief Atleo has to say about recovering Canada's story and Winnipeg's story. Racism, it puts up barriers that frustrate the human spirit, barriers that are like roadblocks to success and prosperity for all of us. When we recover the true Canadian story of peace and of partnership and inclusion, our highest ideals that we cherish as Canadians, we improve our chances of success as well. Making Canada a more inclusive, welcoming place makes Canada a better place to do business, as well as being, and even more importantly, I think a better place, period. Declaring 2016 as the year of reconciliation for our city was an important thing to do. It gave us focus, it gave us a start, but of course, as I've said many times, including here tonight, this is just the beginning. I want to mention too, in Winnipeg, we rightly focus on Indigenous inclusion because of our history and our future. But we're also one of Canada's great multicultural cities, like Toronto. And we're becoming more so through immigration, which we want to continue to see and encourage and foster. We've been welcoming refugees from Syria and from around the world, something I'm very proud of. And we're reminding ourselves of the need for inclusion for all those communities that make Winnipeg and make Canada their home. One of the things that has really tugged at my heartstrings has been seeing the way that students responded at all levels, hearing university students talk about how their eyes have been opened by courses that teach them about Indigenous history and culture. And I made a campaign pledge to visit every high school in Winnipeg over a 2-year period. We've got about 60, I think we've got 64 high schools. So I'm visiting right now 1 or 2 a week. And the purpose of the discussions are to talk about diversity, to talk about reconciliation and civic engagement. And when you talk to high school students, you feel very, very optimistic about the future of our country. They are engaged, they are passionate, and they're much smarter than I was in high school. They are just incredibly talented, and I leave the high schools feeling really good about the future. You know, and visiting those high schools, it reminds me of a quote from Nelson Mandela that you'll know. He wrote in The Long Walk to Freedom, "No one's born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must be taught to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, because love comes more natural to the human heart than its opposite." Now, our city will keep working to promote inclusion and implement the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action that specifically pertain to cities. Word of advice, don't ever refer to them as recommendations in front of Senator Murray Sinclair. They were very deliberately, as some of you will know, not called recommendations, because recommendations can be put on a shelf and ignored. These are calls to action, and the choice of words used in the TRC calls to action were very deliberate and very carefully drafted for a purpose. Of course, Nancy MacDonald, who wrote the article in Maclean's, has said that Senator Murray Sinclair told her that the real change isn't going to come from government. It's going to come city by city, neighborhood by neighborhood, and family to family. It's going to come from the grassroots level. That's why the Make It Awkward campaign that Don Iveson has launched on social media, and the hashtag is Make It Awkward if you want to check it out, is so important, because it has to happen around the kitchen tables, the coffee tables, at the pubs, at the football games or hockey games, in the rinks, curling rinks, out in the community. That crazy uncle who says something that's terribly offensive that may have been laughed off in the future, you need to make it awkward. Not violently, but make it awkward. Call them out on it. So your efforts, all of your efforts to promote inclusion, which I know many of you are doing, are absolutely crucial. And I hope you'll check out the resources that are available at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, which resides at the University of Manitoba. Now, I know the U of T Faculty of Law is a leader in promoting the work of inclusion already. However, my challenge for all of you in this room today is simple. Find and recover your piece of that Canadian story, the story of peace and partnership that the treaties were meant to tell, that piece of the story that we as a country have somehow lost track of. And share it with your community, share it with the world. Thanks very much for listening patiently so far. Before I wrap up and we can get into hopefully more interesting Q&A, I just want to sum up a few closing remarks. Do we have reason to be hopeful about our future as a more inclusive nation and community? Do we have reason to be hopeful that the shadows which have darkened our past can be dispelled? Well, based on everything that I've seen and heard over the last 2 years serving as mayor, and certainly during this year of reconciliation, in neighborhoods across Canada, give me the unreserved answer of yes. Yes, of course we have reason to hope. Because as Winnipeggers have showed us when we dealt with the Maclean's article, and so many other communities, including Toronto, have shown us that there are plenty of courageous people in our country, in Toronto and in Winnipeg, people who are not afraid to deal with problems honestly and head on, people who care so deeply about the work of reconciliation. And I believe that we will reimagine Canada, and that we'll recover that story of peace and partnership and shared prosperity, a Canada that was envisioned to be. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Merci and miigwech. And I'd love to have questions and answers. Sure.
More skilled at handling a scrum than I am.
Yeah, any question as long as they're easy. Yeah.
Do we have a hand up mic? Okay. Okay, great. Questions? Okay. Well, actually, we're filming. Okay.
One of the buttons? No? I can repeat the questions for the camera if you'd like. Hi.
Hi. I'm just curious what the largest frustration you've had in this effort towards reconciliation, and more specifically around the limits of your power as mayor.
Yeah, question.
And how you've dealt with those limitations.
That's a great question. You know what, overall it's been a positive experience. The challenge I have with, which isn't unique to any challenging job, is just there isn't enough time in the day. We also have to fix roads. You know, it's primarily municipal government is pipes and potholes, but it's also about pride. And so for me, municipal government is, you know, I learned here in this faculty about the constitutional division of powers. And municipal government is all about pick up the garbage, fix the roads, make the buses run on time, make sure they're clean, make sure law enforcement gets resources they need. But over the years, and certainly maybe it's also part of me getting involved in the process, I'm having a greater appreciation for what I would call the cross-pollination of those traditional areas of responsibility. You find the Canadian federal government, the provincial governments, and municipal governments dipping their toes into areas that traditionally they're not a part of. And I think part of the reason is because it's through partnerships with other levels of government and stakeholders. That's how we get things done together. The biggest challenge for me is really just the resources. The bulk of my time is fixing the roads and those sorts of things. So I would say it's time. I haven't, you know, we've certainly faced some racism in our response. You know, every time I speak out, you get the online haters who say, why are you focusing on Indigenous peoples? Like it's somehow charitable. And that's why my formal remarks are all about the fact that, you know, this is an opportunity for all Canadians. It doesn't matter what your background is. So there is that. But fortunately with social media, as frustrating as that can be, it's also a powerful platform to get your message out. And we're getting that message out as Canadians. So I'd say time would be the biggest challenge. I'm just now seeing a lot of my profs. It's nice to see you guys. Yeah.
So first off, I want to say I'm actually from Winnipeg. I went to high school and did my undergraduate there.
Whereabouts?
High school at Grace Collegiate and
Right on.
at University of Winnipeg.
Terrific.
So, you know, obviously bearing in mind the limitations regarding powers and fundings, I'm really curious about programs. I want to preface this by re-quoting the idea about frustrating the human spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Discrimination leads to lack of employment, leads to mental health problems and substance abuse problems, which are very, very visible in the streets of Winnipeg. So I'm really interested in what kind of programs you might be encouraging or investigating in that regard, employment and addictions programs, because I know that the addictions programs in Winnipeg are always way overfilled, and the demand is quite large.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking in many ways just about poverty, mental health. I mean, the legacy of residential schools, we see it at our drop-in centers, and Siloam Mission is a place that you probably know of in Winnipeg that feeds a lot of people who need help. And the statistics of Indigenous peoples, I mean, it's 11% of the community, but of course, well over half, probably 3/4 of the clients they serve are Indigenous. Residential school survivors, intergenerational survivors, a lot of mental health, drug and alcohol addiction. We're now having issues, not exclusive to Indigenous, but in our community, like other communities, with dealing with the fentanyl crisis. What we're doing for City Hall, I'll rattle off a few of the things that we're doing in reconciliation that touch on it a little bit. One is mandatory training for our roughly 10,000 employees on reconciliation. So that's something that we'll be moving forward with in the new year. We're developing an Indigenous Accord. We're laying the groundwork. But on the ground, some of the things that we're doing is we're working with groups like the Omega Foundation and the McConnell Foundation from Montreal, and we're working on something called the Winnipeg Promise. This is a promise that I made and this group made to ensure that every child in our community that is entitled to the Canada Learning Bonds, that we're going to remove the barriers and get them signed up so they can get free money so they can pursue post-secondary education. And that's one of the steps that we're working on. We're also dealing with, not a traditional municipal area of responsibility, homelessness. So I've embraced a housing first approach, and I think it was the first or the second council meeting, we got unanimous support for funding for the United Way's plan to end homelessness, not manage it, end it. And we're on track in 9 years to have it gone. Medicine Hat's done it. I know other communities are working towards it, and we will in Winnipeg end it. It's going to take a lot of work by a lot of folks. We've also funded the Community Homeless Assistance Team. So this is some of the people you're talking about who are out on the street. Sadly, in winter, when it is cold, you don't want to be out on the street in Winnipeg or any Canadian city. And what we were finding is people were falling through the cracks. If they're not at a Salvation Army or they are not in a shelter to have a place to rest, a safe place, they're under bridges and they're in back lanes. And so we need to have people physically going out into back lanes, looking for them and establishing dialogue. And so we're funding social workers. It's run through the downtown Winnipeg Biz. And we stepped up with funding for a substantial number of social workers that are now walking out in the streets, especially when conditions are bad. And they're trying to help make sure that we're looking after people. Again, not traditional areas of responsibility. I've taken flack for it from people saying just fix the roads. But these are our citizens. And it doesn't matter if somebody is, in many cases, these are people, citizens who have moved from northern communities, Indigenous, and we are providing support services to refugees, and we want to make sure that whether you're a refugee and you're coming from Syria or you're moving from northern Manitoba, that support base so that you can be successful and safe is there. And so we're trying to work as a community to make sure that those support bases are there. That's a great question. Thank you.
Also a Winnipegger, FRC.
Right, that's for my wife, my FRC.
We'll talk more.
Yes.
So you mentioned funding for police services in Winnipeg, and I'm wondering, of the 10,000 employees that are receiving mandatory training, cultural competency and reconciliation training, if the police are included in that?
Yes.
And also if you could speak a little bit more about what that is going to include.
Well, it's being developed right now. We're working with elders in the community on how the training is going to unfold, and so I'm really deferring to them. We're going to have, I mean, we envision that we're going to have survivors of residential schools come in and tell their stories, just so people understand. I mean, my family didn't go to residential schools. I'm not a residential school survivor. I'm learning as much of the experience for me that our employees are going to go through. I've been learning over the years myself. I didn't know about the 60s scoop until a few years ago. And as a dad, I always get choked up when I get to the parts of the speech that deal with the thought of removing children from their families forcibly. So our police absolutely are expected to have mandatory training. They get training right now. And the resources that, one of the things we're struggling with right now, and if you Google me and our budget, we just tabled it this week. We're increasing our police budget, historic funding, but it's not as much as our police union would like. And so, police budgets are something that all municipalities are really grappling with, is how to contain the costs while also protecting our citizens. And so that's something we're now on track for a more sustainable funding, but the training has to be part of it. Absolutely. We have a police board as well, so I don't have a direct say in the police operations, but I do have a say in setting the tone, the expectations, as well as setting the budget, like the overall budget. We give them a check, and then the police board decides how they spend it. Yeah, thanks. I have to say, this is a lot more modern than the old moot court room. I took several courses in that moot court room, and it was great, but this is spectacular.
I'm not going to lead off asking you a tough question like the kindergarten class. Do you like horses? Do you know how to ride a horse? Do you own a horse? Since the time we were both in law school, it seems like the world was moving to becoming more interconnected, more accepting. And you've always been a positive person. You ran a positive campaign.
Could you hold it local? I'm Sam Chelsea, and you can.
Yeah, more recent events with Brexit and the recent U.S. presidential election, it seems positivity's under assault at the moment.
One would think.
Do you still hold out as much hope that we're still progressing forward?
Yeah.
Or do you think that's a reflection of something else that's going on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, certainly when I was running for office and since, people expect. I've always thought that political leaders can take two paths. One is a divide and conquer path, which politically sometimes is more successful at getting into office. But in terms of leading, it's destructive. And the Canada that I hold near, that I referenced in my comments, is one that has been built by political leaders of all political stripes, doing their best to bring people together. We've been very well served by prime ministers and premiers across our country who have been voices and champions for tolerance. Watching the U.S. election was something else. About a year ago, I sent a letter to then candidate Donald Trump, inviting him to visit the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, because I believed at that time, as I do now, that he could learn something about human rights and the values of tolerance and inclusion. He hasn't taken me up on that, but it's a museum that I think everybody can benefit from learning. I certainly don't have the answers in terms of why that message worked. It's obviously what's happening right now in terms of the voices internationally, and you mentioned Brexit, that are using fear of immigration and people who are different. It's very, very troubling and concerning to see what appears to be a rise in hate speech, crimes. We don't have statistics on it right now, but I know in Winnipeg today we had posters up that were intolerant and were being described as being fascist. And so just like Ottawa was dealing with a few days ago. And it's something that, you know, if there's lessons to be learned from some of the greatest tragedies in human history, it's good people need to speak out. They need to speak out loud, and they need to speak out for those who can't speak out for themselves. So I think the president-elect has a difficult task of bringing his country together. That's the measurement that he should be judged upon now, that he's won the election's over, and he won it through democratic process, but his task now is to have a less divided country than he took over. And the time will tell whether or not he's able to do that. So far, just during the campaign at least, I wouldn't be optimistic about it, but we'll see.
Hi, thanks very much for a very interesting presentation.
Well, thank you.
Dean Yakovich, you gave a wonderful introduction that helped tell us about your very innovative legal career. And then you also mentioned your idea of surrounding yourself with people who are very smart and have skills perhaps that are different. So I'm wondering if you can reflect on what about your legal training and your legal career have made you a good mayor, and what aspects of your team who maybe aren't lawyers or who are different kinds of lawyers or who differ from you in other ways have complemented your skills.
Well, I'm trying to be a good mayor. I'm trying to do my best. Certainly, when I was in practice, you know, the skills you learn at law school, I find, are about, you know, asking questions, about doing your due diligence, figuring out what you don't know. And I learned a lot at law school. I learned even, you know, I continued to learn and try to get better at everything from reading comprehension to just the craft of law over the 14 years that I practiced. And one of the things that I really liked about practice is the way I described it to non-lawyer friends of mine is you get paid to learn about a business. It's incredible. In order to apply the law, you have to know the facts. You have to be able to know a business, to know an organization in order to then be able to advise them properly. So that ability to ask questions, that ability to challenge things when you don't things are right, are skills that good lawyers are trained to do and do very well. And that's something in elected office I certainly bring to the table. Much of my day is sitting around a boardroom table, getting confidential briefings with our senior administration and some of my council colleagues, you know, they'll come forward with reports that we'll see, and we'll push back hard in a respectful way, and we'll challenge them, and the end result should be better. And it's cultivating that, you know, that culture of collaboration where you can have good, honest, frank discussions, challenge each other, then walk out the door and know that the reasons that you were doing that, it's not personal, but you owe it to taxpayers, you owe it to the citizens to do that. So in my office, as I mentioned, Jason's an engineer, and I usually don't hold it against him, but it actually serves us quite well because a lot of the work we're doing is engineering, and he brings a different mindset than a legal mind. And I think we complement each other that way. There are others in my office who, there are no other lawyers in my office. Our staff is 12, 13 right now, and no lawyers. On council, we have 3 lawyers. Council's 16. It's a much smaller council than Toronto. And you know, the legal training, I don't think it necessarily makes you a better elected official, but it definitely gives you skills that I know in my case I wouldn't have had I not received the training at U of T and had I not been in practice. On a practical level, the other thing is time management. You know, when you're working for billable hours, and you're having to go from, you know, one case to another. I remember criminal law. I remember having 400 pages one night due to this evil professor that made us read and read and read. And I'm joking when I say evil. It was great training, but we had to read so much, and the ability to then go into class, and when you get the Socratic method, you got to be ready for prime time, is exactly the same as in public life. I will go out into a scrum. I don't have a clue, right now, what questions are going to ask. And so you do need to be able to think on your feet. You also need to be very disciplined with your time. And I have a staff that manages my time. We get, I mean, last time I checked, over 200 requests for meetings per day on average, and over 200 event requests. Like we're busy. We have a triage system. We have a website to help us manage and go through that. But I get up at about 4:45 in the morning, and I also go to sleep. Usually, if I don't have evening events, I'm lucky if I can put my kids to bed before I fall asleep. And that time management kind of work ethic is something that is great training in law school and in practice for a position of leadership like I'm in right now. Uh-oh. Hi.
Is this working? So wanted you to reflect a little bit on the role of social media. I tracked you in the campaign, and you were an avid user of social media.
Yeah.
And then you ran on one of the points that you made earlier. You ran on the idea of transparency, greater transparency.
Yeah.
And your current, I follow you on Instagram, Facebook. And social media has been very much a part of who you are as a mayor. How has that evolved, and positive, negatives?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I watched what Nenshi did, and like a lot of Canadians, he was, I think, in many ways known as kind of the first social media candidate or mayor that really succeeded, in part by leveraging social media. The one thing, the local media in Winnipeg really took note of that when I was fortunate enough to win. But what you can't ignore is still, and our new Prime Minister also has demonstrated this. At the end of the day, each selfie is a face-to-face experience with a voter and with a citizen. And so it's not a replacement, it complements traditional engagement. You can't replace meeting people in person, getting out in the community. I write letters. I sign all my letters myself. Like we use whatever mechanisms we can. What I like about social media is it's timely, it's unedited. You can speak directly to voters and citizens without having to go through the filter of the media, which their influence is decreasing over the years because of social media. You can speak directly in that way. What we were doing in the campaign is really using social media to monitor and to listen more than blast messaging. Like blasting is a big part. If you follow me, you'll see, I'm posting pictures where I'm at. I try not to just post pictures of myself, but also of much more interesting people. And that opportunity to listen and to monitor was something that we worked on quite aggressively in the campaign. We formed different teams. So first we had a virtual campaign office using some open source. That's the benefit of having an electrical engineer as a campaign manager. And we also spoke with Nenshi, some of Nenshi's closer advisors who I happen to know, and about what they did, and we tried to improve upon it. And I think Justin Trudeau. I know that they certainly looked at some of the campaigns that had happened in recent years, ours included, and took that and took it to another level with bigger team, bigger resources. We were one of the first teams we built, though, was our technology team and a branding team and a social media team, and that was it had to be authentic. It has to be who you are. So you can't be something on social media and people meet you and go, who are you? It needs to be authentic, and it's a good now in office. It's a great way to get the message out, but also we have a dashboard in my office on a big screen, and it's a social media dashboard. So I'm monitoring, in real time, how many people are on our website, how many people are using. We monitor different social media feeds. We track analytics, and that's something we used open source data, and we do that as a listening tool. Yeah. It's also just fun. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. It's been most informative.
Oh, thank you.
The Dean referenced an incident in your life in school where you took Bannock for lunch and you were teased. As part of the reconciliation initiatives, have any programs been developed for young children in early elementary school at a very simple level and then right through to the end of high school?
The short answer is yes. We are working in our community at something called Empathy Games. So Empathy Games are something that if you're not familiar with, I would suggest check it out online. These are games that we have school children using to teach empathy in our kids. It's a model that was initially used in St. John's High School. It's a school in our inner city to combat bullying. And they found the number of reported incidents, the principal's office were reduced, I believe in the first year of doing the empathy games by 85%, like absolutely effective. They're now using it in the reconciliation work. And it was so successful that Winnipeg School Division has embraced it. It's now something being looked at across Manitoba. And I'm focusing my efforts on high school students. I am visiting some other earlier, younger children, but there's a lot of really good work happening in the community, and that's exactly where we need to be focusing in on is our youth, because they don't have some of the prejudices at that point that we're trying to deal with in others in our community. That's a great question.
One more question.
Not from a Flames fan. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak, just building off the last question, what are some of the things the universities in Winnipeg are doing to tackle reconciliation? And if you had any recommendations even for students or student groups at university campuses?
Well, you know what? That's a great question. The University of Manitoba has the Center for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. University of Winnipeg is doing incredibly important work. We have universal interest and action happening at the colleges and universities. Couple examples, one of which we are actually planning to fund this year is called Youth United at University of Winnipeg, and it's an effort to link inner city neighborhoods with and children with students from more affluent areas of our city, to actually get in the communities, because some people I know in Toronto and Winnipeg, you live in a certain area of the city, you kind of stay there. You don't always get out. So we're trying to just build those connections. So we're actually funding it, and it's money that's going to go to the University of Winnipeg, so we can help build those linkages. The reconciliation, that acknowledgement that I always reference in Winnipeg Treaty 1 land and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. We're now doing that at City Hall for every council meeting, for every formal remark that I make in Winnipeg. We're now seeing that almost universally done everywhere. Colleges, universities have led the charge. They're also, like this faculty, colleges and universities are they are areas where thought leaders come together. And so we obviously as a country haven't figured everything out. We don't have all the answers for how we're going to completely deal with the topic that I was talking about tonight, but I think many of those answers are going to come from the centers of thought, which are universities. And so that's why it's really important that the programs are developed, that this topic doesn't go away in a year or two, that we continue to amplify and motivate all of us to do better. And also realize that this is important for all Canadians, regardless of their background. Yeah, thanks for that question.
I just went, is this on? Yeah. Here we are. Thank you so much for all the words of wisdom. One, I think, really positive message about this is that you're mayor of a city that has had its challenges. You've not shied away from them, and some of them go to some of the darker aspects of human nature that manifest from time to time. But
bring to it this determination and a sense of optimism that is very clear to people in this room, and maybe those on your Twitter feed as well, authentic. So thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for the honor of being able to speak here tonight. Thanks.